Hi, today in the Wheelbarrow Series class, we're going to talk about growing gladiolus in Kentucky. Gladiolus is derived from Latin gladius, meaning sword, hence the common name. Some people still call it the sword lily. Gladiolus are sometimes referred to as just glads, which I probably will do that quite a bit in this uh, class because it's just easy to say. The genus of Gladiolus occurs naturally in Asia, the Mediterranean, part of Europe, South Africa, and tropical Africa. But South Africa is pretty much the hub of the glad world, holding around 200 cultivars, with more still being discovered to this day. The history of the gladiolus in the what we would call the Western world or modern world started in Europe in the 1680s with hybridization starting in the 1800s. The first species to board Dutch and English ships in Cape Town, which is South Africa, uh, was Gladiolus elatus, blandus, recurvus, and tristis. Philip Miller had the honor of flowering the first glad in England in 1745, and that would have been Gladiolus tristis. William Herbert in England was the first to actually hybridize the glads in 1806. However, his hybrids proved to be sterile and never made it into commerce. These were likely what we would call triploids today. If you're familiar with a lot of our plants we grow, there are a lot of triploids out with plants like daylilies, but with the glads, it just was a dead end. James Covell introduced the first hybrids to enter commerce in England in 1823 with the Covelli hybrids. These hybrids were crosses between Gladiolus tristis, variety concolor, and Gladiolus cardinalis. The Covelli hybrids did well in England. It was soon found that they actually required fall planting for spring bloom, kind of different than what we do today. Other species arrived in England in the 1820s and 30s, including Psittacinus, Opsiflorus, and Papilio. Psittacinus is actually used in some medications, believe it or not, to this day. These new species bloomed in the summer and could be dug and stored in the winter and planted in the spring. Glads came to the U.S. in the 1860s, and hybridization had created new strains by then. Most of our modern varieties can be traced back to the lines of Victor Lemon of France. He advanced color selections into browns, greens, and deep reds, and you can see that kind of brown in the picture there of that flower color. During the late 1800s to the mid 1900s, hybridization increased, giving us the multicolored giant glads as we know today, and they come in just about all colors. Not a true blue, but most of the other colors. They're pretty extraordinary in that aspect. Hybridizers continue to strive to this day for increased hardiness and fragrance. Here we're going to talk about a little gladiolus botany. The actual bulb of a gladiolus is actually a corm, which is not a true bulb. And it's actually, you can see the video, the definition there. It's a rounded underground storage organ present in plants such as crocuses, gladiolus, and cyclamens. Basically, it's a swollen stem base that's covered with scales, and it stores food in there that it grows from. Kind of a starch base, kind of similar to maybe a tuber. You can also see the little cormlets there that form on the sides of the mature bulb. Those are little baby bulbs or corms that would eventually grow into flowering size corms like the bulb you see there in the picture. So first, when you plant your glads, maybe as early as April, maybe as late as July, you see the bulb there in the first picture. By May, you see it starting to grow there, and you notice that the old corm is actually shriveling a little bit, and there's a new one forming on top. And then by June, you pretty much got a shriveled older corm with a new one formed on it, and then by August, you've got the completely new bulb or corm formed, and the old one is kind of withered. And sometimes when you dig these, you'll still find remnants of it, and you just break that off. But basically, you have a whole new corm every year, unlike you would say if you were planting a tulip bulb and you were to grow it. That same bulb actually, grows for multiple years. Where here, you're getting a new corm every year, so you're not ever digging the same corm and overwintering it like you would with other bulbs and things that you may have dug. This is another picture just showing some of the actual names of parts of the corm, and you can see there the flower stalk and or stem, the sheath of the leaf, the new corm developing, which is on top, and you see, if you can see there, the new roots coming out from that new corm forming on top there, and then you can see how it's just makes basically it takes the all the energy from that old corm and grows a new corm and a flower stalk and all that at the same time. Gladiolus will grow well in many soil types. However, as most plants, they would prefer a loam or a sandy loam. That's going to be your best. It's better than a hard clay, but they will grow in clay soils. pH between 6 to 6.5, which is with a medium fertility, is ideal. Generally speaking, the soils that produce good vegetable crops also be just as good for growing a gladiolus or any of your regular garden soil or flower garden soil. They'll be just fine. They're not heavy feeders, but a little fertilizer is going to go a long way with these. Heavy soils with poor drainage is going to give you poor results because that can rot the bulb or not allow the bulb to actually size up to flowering size for the next growing season. To maintain your fertility, you want to apply about 2 pounds of triple 10. And this is all if you didn't do a soil test, which we always would recommend you do one, but if you didn't do one, this is just some basic requirements. So we're saying about 2 pounds of triple 10 or a similar all-purpose fertilizer per 100 square feet. So if you use triple 19, you'd only use 1 pound instead of two. And you can work that into your soil at planting. That'll be best. If you're using manures or organic fertilizers, you should also work those into your soils, but make sure you don't get too much direct contact, especially if maybe your manure is not quite aged enough, which you should let it age before you use it. But if you do go ahead and use it, just make sure that you get that worked in and incorporate it well. You don't want that to come in direct contact with that corn because it will rot that corn. Once you've gotten your bulbs, you're ready to plant. You want to select a spot with full sun. That's generally over 5 hours of direct sun contact a day. You want good drainage. You don't want any competition with woody shrubs or trees because they're going to take nutrients and water and the plant just won't grow well. In Kentucky, the first gladiolus can be planted in mid-April with successive plantings every 2 weeks until July. This will give you continuous blooms for cutting if you like to cut them, or maybe you want to sell them. That'll give you a continuous bloom. Depending on variety and weather conditions, though, most varieties take about 70 to 90 days to bloom from planting. And then you need to have, a time after the bloom where that foliage can take up, can photosynthesize enough food to size that corm up underground again for you so you can get another good repeat bloom the following season. It's best to plant large bulbs about 4 to 6 inches deep, medium bulbs about 3 to 4 inches deep, and small bulbs 2 or 3 inches deep, just depending on the bulb size because they're going to need to be a little deeper if they are a larger bulb because again, remember, these are growing new bulbs on or corms on top of that old corm. So they are going to raise up in that soil, a couple inches maybe. The trench method here works well for glads with single or staggered double rows in each trench. For show quality flowers, you want to plant 6 inches apart, but for cutting or general garden culture, 3 inches will be adequate. These plants do not take up a lot of room. They grow pretty much straight up and they've got a fan shape, so they're kind of flat. The only cultivation needed is to keep down the weeds. However, a layer of mulch after the soil has been pulled around the bulbs is a good option. That's going to keep those weeds from germinating and keep those weeds out of there. It's also going to conserve moisture. Any mulch you want to use, pretty much organic mulches are great for these. Straw, wood chips, shavings, even sawdust or leaf mold. If you do use some of the shavings, maybe, and even the sawdust, if it's not aged well, you will have to add a little extra nitrogen because as that decomposes, that does pull nitrogen out of your soil. So you want to add a little more nitrogen if you're using those. Also, don't use fresh shavings or sawdust because that can have tannins in it that can actually burn the plants as they come up through the soil. Pre-emergent for herbicides is also a good option. You can throw that down right after you plant. That would be something like preen. Then you can put the mulch over top of that, so you kind of got a double whammy there to stop the weeds from growing because you've got the herbicide to keep those seeds from germinating, and then you've got the mulch as a little extra insurance to help keep those under control as well. Plants do need ample water through the growing season. Droughts will reduce your flower size, your number of flowers, the life of the flowers, and also can affect your corm development for the next season. So you want to keep them watered. During dry weather, you want to water your plants weekly, supplying the equivalent of about 1 inch per week, which is about what all of our garden plants require. Do remember to water infrequently and deeply, avoiding wetting the foliage and flowers because, again, if you get that foliage wet, the more often it's wet, the higher chance you have of getting foliar diseases. And also, the more you get the flowers wet, the less they're going to last. Glads must be staked if you want a straight flower spike, which meaning a florist quality. spike. If all the plants are to be straight, each plant will need to be staked individually. And you can see the picture there. They're tying that flower spike to each glad is getting its spike tied to a stake. That's going to keep it straight. Most gardeners are just going to plant in clump. That's what I do. And then tie or plant in rows with stakes every several feet with wire or even string. And that's just going to keep them relatively upright, which will give you a relatively straight flower spike. But for most of us at home, we're going to maybe leave these in the garden or cut them and bring them in. And we're not looking for something that's perfectly straight. It's not something that we're willing to do the work to go out and tie in each individual glad up just to have that straight spike. After plants are established and about 6 to 10 inches tall, you want to side dress with 1 pound of triple 10 per 100 feet of row. You can just band it 4 to 6 inches from the base of the plant. You can also use triple 19, which would be half that amount. A second application can be made just after the flower spike starts to show through the foliage. It's just going to give a little extra jolt to really push that flower spike out and get that, get you a nice big flower bloom. Don't overdo it though, because again, just like all other plants, if you get excessive nitrogen, that will cause too much foliage and less flowering. It's the same if you were to over fertilize tomatoes or something like that. You'll get all the foliage, but not the flowers and the fruit. With these, we're just looking for flowers, but still, too much nitrogen is a bad thing. So you want to dig your corms 4 to 6 weeks after flowering. When the tops have died off, they can be dug anytime before a hard freeze. And you want to leave healthy plants as long as possible because you're going to maximize that corm development. But a lot of times these plants will let you know that they're finished because the tops of the plant will actually start to die back. And when that happens, you know that that plant is sized up, that corm as big as it's going to. After you dig the corms, you want to wash off the soil. That soil, if it's sticky, very sticky, you want to go ahead and rinse that off. And you want to cut your tops to within about a half an inch of the top of the corm. And then you want to spread them out in a warm, dry area for about 2 to 3 weeks. You can do that in a garage, you can do that in a barn, a carport, a basement, pretty much anywhere it's going to be dry, they're fine. You can lay them out there. You go ahead and remove the old corm from the base if it's still there and discard that because it's shriveled and usually withered and gone by now. And then you want to sort your corms and cormels by size. So if you're going to save the cormels, little baby corms, go ahead and pull those off, and then you can put those separately and you can sort those by size. But be sure that you pull those off. You don't want to plant those back in with that larger corm. So you're going to go ahead and separate them all out that way. If you do want to keep the cormels, it's going to take you maybe 2 to 3 seasons if you replant in the spring before you get a flowering size corm. So just be patient if that's something you want to do. It's going to take you a few seasons to get that, and it's going to be planting and digging, just like you would with the larger corms that are actually flowering. And then the large corms will flower the following summer from spring planting, just like the bulbs that you obtained this year and you planted. You'll dig those, you'll save those and store those over winter, and then you can plant those back in the spring. As far as storing, I know some people have had success leaving these in the ground. Some success, I should say. Most of the time, it's not successful for that long. But we just live in a transition zone, and we have a kind of a weird up and down temperatures here, and sometimes these will rot, sometimes they will freeze. And if you don't dig them, then you've always got all those little cormels, and they start to smother each other out. So it's best to go ahead and dig. You can store these during the winter at 35 to 45 degrees in a well-ventilated area. I know that most of us don't have a sitting around a refrigerator to put them in. If you don't have that, then go ahead and just store those at a room temperature. If you have a basement where it's cooler, that's going to be better. But you can also store these at room temperature in the dark, even a closet or something. And they'll be, for the most part, fine. But you do want to make sure maybe put a little bit of peat or something like that around them, or even just stack them like you see here, so that at least there's a tiny bit of moisture in there because they're going to dry down, pretty much the entire winter. Containers that are good for storage include wooden baskets, mesh bags, nylon stockings, or even plastic bins with just a bit of dry peat. Do not put the tops on though, because you run the risk of getting a rot then, because you're going to have a higher humidity, maybe even a sweat, and then you're just going to have a rotten mess by spring. So do not put a top on those if you do use plastic. You can also dust the corms with a fungicide powder if you're worried about them rotting, or if you've had a problem with them rotting. I generally don't do that, but if you do choose, you can just do some of the powdered sulfur fungicides or something like that, and just sprinkle it on there and just kind of shake them around on there, and that way you'll go ahead and stop that rot before it even starts. Glads are relatively free of insects. The most troublesome, though, is the Gladiolus thrip, which is a common pest on glads. Thrips do considerable damage to the flowers and foliage, and you can see in the picture there that cause bronzing, spots, malformed flowers. Thrips actually even overwinter with the corm, so just keep that in mind. If you know you've had a thrip problem on them, then you're likely overwintering them. If you want to make sure you control them when you're not overwintering them, I should say, you want to go ahead and treat with a multi-purpose systemic insecticide such as acephate, which is an orthene product, or imidacloprid, which is generally several companies carry that product, but Bayer Advanced is usually what is sold at the big box stores around here that are easy to obtain. If you want to go organic, you can try insecticidal soap, and you can also spray with pyrethrums, which, even though that is an organic-based chemical, it does kill on contact. So if you spray that foliage, you can kill a lot of those with that. Other possible insects that you might have a problem with are slugs. That's going to be an early spring pest. Grasshoppers, I have had some grasshopper damage a little bit. If you get a few of them in there, they can eat quite a bit of foliage pretty quick before you even find them. And then obviously Japanese beetles are going to be one of your bigger ones, especially on your flowers. So if you want to keep these flowers in the garden, then you're going to have some trouble with Japanese beetles if they're flowering at the time that Japanese beetles are present. So remember, we can avoid them to some extent by planting really early or a little bit later to miss that window when they're actually active. If you need to control them, these problems, slug bait works great on the slugs, and then acephate works great on grasshoppers. And then I didn't finish my thought there in the PowerPoint, but in Japanese beetles, it's going to be something like 7. That's our number one option for them. Most of the diseases that occur do occur in storage, and they're bulbs and stem rots, which I talked about earlier. These again can be controlled by keeping the corms cool and dry in storage. So if you've got an old refrigerator, that'd be a great place to store them. You can also go ahead and dust, as I said earlier, with a fungicide. And this is a sulfur-based fungicide here, and it comes in a powder. And you can just dust the bulbs with this, and then you can slow that down or get rid of the rot, any kind of rot that might set in. If you do have some corms that you're worried about, or maybe think some rot set in, get rid of them. Don't even put them in there with the rest of them. You don't want to start a problem if you don't have one already. A few of the species that are out there, we have the Gladiolus murali there. I think sometimes that's called or sold as peacock lily. We have the Gladiolus italica, Gladiolus robinetta, and Gladiolus palustris. And these are some of the species glads that are kind of the forerunners of our modern glads. Then we have our hybrids, which is the ones that we know of today, which were crosses between some of those other varieties. And you can see here that there's the multitude of colors here. You know, splashes, spots, dark purples, reds, pinks. And I already showed you pictures earlier of some of the more bronzy colored ones. And there's also even ruffled petals there you see on the right. But there's a lot out there now that if you really like glads, you can have a lot of variety with these. So those that actually signed up for and paid for the class, they did get bulbs. And for those that didn't sign up early or register, you know you're not going to get bulbs. Those that have picked up their bulbs, I will tell you they are here. I know it was a week ago when we had the in-person class, and I'm just getting around to actually doing the video, but they actually got 5 varieties here. They have Peter Pears, which is an orange, a Spick and Span, which is more of a kind of a pink color, Nova Lux, Trader Horn, which is a deep red, and then the Mixed Hardy. I put those in there because those are ones you actually don't have to dig each year. And you can see they don't have the long, thick flower spike, as many flowers as the large hybrids that we're used to. But they're closer to the older varieties, and they actually can be put in the ground and just left. If anybody has any questions about glads or any other horticulture questions, they can call me at the Washington County Extension Office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening.